First of all, I have to ask, how many people have seen this movie already? Wow! But you came because the people who know the most about it are here. Should I proceed with introductions?
I think you should proceed with the evening.
Very good.
Okay.
So, we have a very distinguished panel, and from my left onward, this is Alex Prudhomme, who, with Julia, wrote the basis of the movie. We don't mention another book that might have had any sort of source material. What counts is My Life in France. So here is the original wonderful cover, which I own several copies of. You will be very glad to hear. And however many you own, you should own several, whichever cover it has. This is the reissued. This is the reissued copy. And now we have the very beautiful and elegant Judith Jones, who is portrayed in the movie by someone not even half as beautiful and elegant as she.
That's true.
And she is the author not only of The 10th Muse, a marvelous memoir of her life in food, but the new, really marvelous Pleasures of Cooking for One, which just this week was nominated for a James Beard Book Award. We should all give her a round of applause. Now, Jacques Pépin is so often nominated for James Beard Awards that you surely were on that list as well in broadcast.
I was?
Yes, he was. He was.
Thank you.
For multiple things. Jacques always has so much going on, there's no possible way of keeping track. But here is his memoir as well, which is called The Apprentice, My Life in the Kitchen. And please tell us exactly what you were nominated for.
I don't remember.
See, he does so much. I think his name appears several times, and it's in broadcast media. As I
Yeah, this
recall.
one I was nominated, yes, right.
And this one he was nominated for. Jacques is a long
But I didn't
time
win, so.
James Beard Award favorite. So I would like to run down the panel, starting with Judith, and ask you a sort of after-action report. Now that you've lived with this movie for a long time, you've done an enormous amount of press about it. How has it changed your view of your time with Julia, or has that remained carefully pristine and untouched?
It hasn't changed my memories of Julia and my relationship with her at all, really. And I think that Meryl Streep does a wonderful, brilliant sort of caricature of the Julia who loved life, but there was a side to her that seems to me missing in the movie. But it's a movie, and it's a movie about a Julie and a Julia, and thank goodness Julia wins in the end. I mean,
Yes.
people go out and want to buy her book, and it's just been selling like crazy.
Which is wonderful, because Nora Ephron, the director and screenwriter, said that one of her hidden motivations was to spur book sales, and I think that both Alex and Judith can say that she succeeded in that goal. But please tell us about the side of Julia that is missing.
Well, Julia had a mission, and she really wanted to make people in this country cook well. And there was no means. The cooking schools didn't teach real technique. She believed that French cooking was really the one codified cooking for the Western world, and you had to learn the techniques. You can't aspire to any art form and not learn the basics. And she just wanted to get to the bottom of it and to understand theory and practice, and how there was a master recipe and then all these variations on the master recipe. And if you learn these things, they were imprinted in your cooking brain forever. You don't have to follow slavishly that recipe. Once you've made a perfect bourguignon, you're all set. And it was a passion, and she would always go to the source. In fact, Paul, her husband, was always saying, "Julie, put it to the test." And she would. She, for instance, made a little sausage at my suggestion for the cassoulet. And I went to her kitchen in Cambridge, and one whole wall was covered in her findings. She went back to old charcuterie books and the formula, and then how she tried it and what was her verdict. And then at the end, hooray, I've got it. It just, that side of her, that she was very serious and driven.
Well, I think that in the movie we see her being enormously serious in the cooking school at the Cordon Bleu to master the techniques herself. But I think the misconception you're talking about is when we watch the young woman, who shall remain nameless even though she has the same name, who is trying very hard to duplicate that recipe, and it seems like a sort of endless ordeal, right? As opposed to, this is equipping you to be your own cook, to be your own master in the kitchen.
Yep.
So I guess that is a side that might be somewhat missing. Alex, what side, and because you've both fielded so many questions about Julia since the movie came out, what are misconceptions or sides that you think have not really been touched on, or you felt you've needed to explain?
Well, I would just add to Judith's observation. I take a slightly different view. I think that Meryl Streep did a wonderfully nuanced performance, and if you look at the movie, we'll see it tonight, and if you look at it carefully, you'll see that she was able to get Julia's physicality. I mean, I've met Meryl Streep, and she comes up to about here on me. She's not a big woman, but when you look at the film, she plays as if she were 6'2", as Julia was. And it's not just that she's wearing high heels, it's the way she moves. I also thought that she captured an intelligence behind the cheerful exterior, with a subtle look in her eye or a movement of her head. I thought there was an undertone. There's of course a lot of great humor, and her charisma comes through, but there is an undertone of thoughtfulness. At one point in the film, there's a little sadness. And I thought that given that she was the lead in only half the movie, she did a remarkable job. Of course, it wasn't the real Julia. It was, and I don't agree with the word caricature. For me, that has a pejorative tone to it. For me, it was, as A.O. Scott said in the New York Times, it was a performance. It wasn't an impersonation, it was a performance. And when you look at Meryl Streep playing Julia, you know it's Meryl Streep. You've seen her in a zillion different movies. But you see her embodying the spirit of Julia, and that allows you to get to know Julia in a way that kind of got behind the mask a little bit. The reality is that the Julia that you all saw on television and read in her books, that's the real Julia. That's the Julia that we all knew. But the performance was amped up a little bit. She turned up the volume. She smiled a little bit more broadly on television. She hammed it up because she was a natural-born performer. She loved to do that.
She certainly was, yeah.
And I think that you're right, that Meryl was channeling that side of her more. But that was really Julia. I mean, when Julia and I were sitting alone in a room working on this book together, that she was cracking jokes and carrying on and seeing if I was following her. She'd sometimes say funny little things to make sure I was paying attention. And, you know, she was, as Judith said, she was really driven. And I think the thing I loved about Meryl's performance was that it captured this drivenness and the sense of humor. And that's very difficult because those are two sometimes opposite traits. Corby and I had the great pleasure of being extras in one scene in the movie. And if you blink, you'll miss us, particularly me. You might notice Corby, but we're standing by a door when Meryl Streep, as Julia, comes into what's supposed to be the U.S. Embassy and looks around for a few minutes, and we're standing right by the door, so pay attention to that tonight.
43 minutes in.
Yeah.
My spouse asked friends, "You've got to time, where is it?" And they did. 43 minutes. Look for Alex,
Okay,
far right.
yeah. We're smoking fake cigarettes and drinking fake drinks. Anyway, she did that scene about 43 times, I think. We sat there as she came in and made her entrance. And what was fascinating was we were standing maybe 3 feet away. Seeing her do it in a slightly different way every time. And I thought it was really interesting to watch the woman I consider the best actress, the best actor in the world today, digging into the personality of someone who I knew very well. And so I'm not sure that in a Hollywood movie you can really plumb the depths of a real, three-dimensional person, right? But I thought that Meryl Streep came about as close as you can, particularly given that she only had half the movie.
I just want to add that I think one of the great scenes, look for it, is for Julia when she's at the école and she's learning to chop and it's awkward and the men are doing it so much better and you can see the look on her face. And then the next scene, she's chopped a pile of onions and she's mastered it. And that to me epitomizes Julia, and it's done in a movie way.
In fact, my favorite scene in the movie is when Stanley Tucci, who plays Paul, comes into the kitchen and Julia has this big pile of onions, and it's so rank he can't even see, and he just says, "Okay, bye." And I think that's pretty true to life.
That's the same thing, yeah.
That's so much fun to play. Okay, so my set story, since Alex brought it up, were you able to watch, because they kept us well away from the action, were you able to watch on monitors her do the scene before that in the powder room at which she...
Yes, indeed.
At which she meets her future collaborators, which is the important scene in the movie. We're just adjuncts at an auxiliary scene that comes right afterward. But it was a lesson in how Nora Ephron directed it, because she did several takes of that, and her version of Julia was almost entirely different in the last from the way it was in the first. And we would see that Nora Ephron would sort of hobble in, come in between takes and say something that we weren't able to hear it because it wasn't being mic'd. But whatever she said completely changed Meryl's take in that, and it became, I thought, much less broad and caricature-ish. It started out as being swooping, that ridiculous voice, but really a little too ridiculous.
Because it wasn't all the time.
It was like a nightclub caricature at the beginning, and then at the end, she was much more toned down. And I thought, what a tribute to both women, but I have to say, especially Nora. Jacques, I have to say, I am a Jacques virgin because I have not discussed this movie with him yet. And he knew Julia as well as anyone on this panel and was her frequent collaborator on camera and off. And so I have to ask you what you think of the Julia in that movie and its congruence and incongruence with the Julia you knew.
Well, I would certainly agree a great deal with both of you. I mean, for me, when they first talked about doing that movie, I said to do the movie with Julia, you have to do Julia's voice. And as soon as you do Julia's voice, it becomes a caricature. But there is no way of not doing Julia's voice, So I say, I always, Meryl Streep getting around that thing. I mean, I remember her voice is so characteristic. My daughter, Claudine, some of you asked me about her. It's 42 years old now.
No.
When she was born, yes.
That's impossible.
Right. When she was born, I knew Julia. I met Julia in 1960. So she always knew Julia, and she always made Julia's voice, And I remember one time when Claudine actually was at BU, she was in college, and the telephone rang at night, and I was having dinner with my wife, Gloria, and Gloria picked up the telephone. She said, okay, all right, fine. Okay, what do you want, Claudine? No, okay, and all of a sudden she said, oh, no, I'm sorry, Julia, I'll call him. She thought it was Claudine doing Julia on the telephone, as she'd always did. So, everyone was doing Julia's voice. I have met Meryl Streep a few times because we did something for the Farmers of Connecticut for a couple of years together, and I agree with you. She's about the size of my wife, 5'6" or whatever, and she looked taller than Julia in the movie, so I don't know how she did it. I heard her voice at the beginning. I said, how is she going to go around that? And you know what? After 5 minutes, I forget entirely, and I look at the performance. I thought it was absolutely extraordinary what she did. I do agree with you. I think she's the greatest actress we have in this country now, without any question. And I truly enjoyed it. The part of Julia, that is, the other part I didn't really You know, the only problem when Julie was on stage is that Julia could not be. That was
A big problem. Two things about how they did it. When we were in that scene together, they had a sort of catwalk. They had a ramp. Do you remember that? It was a wooden platform that was just for Meryl Streep. Exactly the track she would walk, so that the other two women were below her because they were walking on the ground. Plus, she had extremely high shoes. The miracle, in a way, is the actress who's cast as her sister, I think, does a marvelous job.
Her name is Jane Lynch.
And she's on Glee, right?
Exactly.
She's got a big part on Glee, so she's come into her own. But she literally is 6 feet or over. And how they managed to do those scenes together, it must have been especially a high platform because they look the same height. It is extraordinary.
I have to say, the scene when they're on the train station platform and Julia's looking for Dork, her sister, and they see each other and they start, you know, cavelling. Oh!
Yeah, but quelling in a wasp way. You're not supposed to use that word. It's a very wasp moment.
Whatever that word is in the WASP context, whatever they were doing, yodeling, I guess. That is absolutely true to life. I've seen the two of them together, and that's what they did. It's really hilarious.
Yeah.
And Nora was just guessing. Because she
Well,
had
Nora knew Julia, so maybe, but it was an informed guess.
I think it was a very informed guess. And
But you should know, I have heard that except for a couple of scenes were actually done in Paris. Most of it was done in the studio in Queens.
it's done in
Queens,
Brooklyn.
New York.
There's also a
So
restaurant in Brooklyn where they shot the Paris Bistro, where she
that's where they did
Paul
it.
often meet. That was
But I mean, most was done then in Queens. I mean, all except from scene in Paris, right? I mean,
yeah, there's a couple of scenes in Paris. I have to ask, did Claudine ever do Julia's voice in front of Julia?
That's a good question. I don't think so. No. I
Because
think
here is
she wouldn't
my
have dared to.
embarrassing
She
sto-
wouldn't have dared to.
Here's a story I don't tell in public very often. Like everyone here, I was lucky enough to have her as a guest at my house a couple of times, not nearly as many times. And one day she asked me a question, and I said, well, as you said when we discussed this matter a few years ago, and I imitated her voice, and it was because I had just been talking to our friend Nancy Harmon Jenkins, who did a superb Julia. And she looked at me, there was this dead silence for a half a beat, and she cocked her head and said, I don't talk like that. It was the biggest mistake. Can you imagine recovering from that? But of course, Julia being she was the height of good manners. She was the height of good manners and the most marvelous.
But you know what I like about that, Corby? There's a certain steeliness to Julia, and I think this is a little bit what Judith was referring to earlier, that the underneath the great humor and charisma, she was tough.
Yeah.
And
Oh, boy, was
if she didn't like something, you knew it immediately.
Oh, yeah.
I think of
I
all
think
the-
I think I wrote a few sentences that didn't make it into the book for good reason. That
No,
I got that look.
I do agree with that. She could be tough, and also certainly I agree with what Judith said before about her being very serious. I mean, when we were doing television, she always say, "Okay, what are we teaching today?" So it has to be amusing, it has to be fun, it has to be this, but behind all of this, okay, what did they get out of it today? There is always a teaching component that was very important to her, that we are teaching, doing something, That was always very, very important to her. Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to ask a question that that you don't have to answer if it's too unprepared. How did her approach to things like that influence your own approach to teaching and writing? Why don't we start with you and go down?
Certainly opening my mind a little bit. I mean, she's told me a few times, you're a stubborn Frenchman, don't do it this way or whatever. And, seeing her also with young cook, young chef, she was always ready to listen to you and encourage you. And, so many people have told me, I called Julia and she answered herself or she called me back or whatever. She would always do that, always talk to people. So
She listed
certainly
her
that type
phone.
of openness was probably very beneficial to my character.
So do you
yes.
list your telephone number? Because Julia did. And
Oh,
she
yes.
answered the phone.
Oh, sure, yes, right, absolutely. My telephone is in the phone book too, so.
Just have to know where he lives. Judith,
Well, I think she felt that she learned from people, that it was a genuine exchange. But not what she called the flimsies, were people who pretended they were interested in cooking but really wanted it fast and easy and shortcuts. And she could spot them like that, couldn't she?
Absolutely, yeah.
But how
that's
about in your-
probably-
Sir, go ahead.
excuse me, probably one of the things that she said, because when we talk about that movie, and I remember here with Rebecca 2 or 3 years before, when she said, there is that woman who's doing a blog, you know what that is? I said, no. She said, well, she's going to do all the recipe of Mastering the Art of French Cooking in that city. And that was her opinion, but more importantly, what she thought is that that woman will do this, and then she will move to something else. She's not a cook. She's not serious about, the métier or the trade of cooking. It's just a passage. She will take advantage of that, doing this at that point, and move to other things, which is probably true. So for her, that was important that you were dedicated to a trade and serious about it.
it is true. I have to say, in Julie Powell's defense, I will actually name her.
I don't know.
I think what she taught herself through that experience was not cooking, but finding her own voice in writing. So that she really wanted and wants to be a writer. And I think she knows now that food writing is not what she should be doing and not what she's cut out to be doing. And she intends to go on and really not write about food. But Judith, your writing in recipes, and especially in this really marvelous book, has a kind of crystalline clarity to it. Now, I'm perfectly prepared for you to say I was born with that purity. I knew exactly how to write. But do you hear any of your work with Julia as you're writing books about actual cooking?
Well, there's something that I learned as an editor, and I learned it primarily through Julia, and then I applied it to other books that I acquired as an editor, and that is that the voice is important. That a cookbook shouldn't be a sterile formula. What you're trying to do is connect with that poor home cook alone in the kitchen who's just messed up the sauce and it's curdled. And you explain why and how, if you can, to redeem it and try again. And Julia had that voice immediately through all of Mastering, I felt, even though she was writing for the three of them. But you could tell, you could feel her as that teacher and encourager. And I loved the sort of physicality, the visceral way. She'd slap the chicken, she'd plop something into the bowl, real language, and it was her language, not in a bowl combine the first mixture with the second mixture, which is how we write today. This is a subject I'm very passionate about. But I saw that in Julia, and then when she started writing her own books, I really did encourage her to even be a little more personal. She was a very private person, but she certainly connected through food with her readers, and it just set me on a kind of journey of looking for that kind of writing. If Julia does it for French cooking, who'll do it for Middle Eastern or Indian, and very often I found that it was somebody who had left the food of their childhood and wanted to reconnect through food to the past and memories. And
Claudia
relive
Roden,
them.
for example.
Right.
Claudia
Roden.
Many people you've worked with were exactly that. Of course, they were seeking you out too because you had done Mastering.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
I would certainly agree and do a testimonial to Judith, because I did a book called The Art of Cooking, which is a very complicated book, and the editing was very complicated. And I don't ever think that Judith put one word in that book which wasn't my word. She didn't like it. She said, I don't like this, or you've already talked about that, talk about it again, or whatever. She will advise me, but never put a word in my mouth. And when we did the book with Julia, we had a writer I mean, I've done a bunch of cookbook. I never had a writer, but we had to hear because it was she said, he said, she said, and it was actually very, very good. And the editing was Julie, and that was thing. My voice is my voice. Julia's voice is her voice there, and she didn't touch those, and that's very admirable.
Well,
for
it
that.
was
And
the
we do.
dialogue between two wonderful cooks. And what came through was there's more than one way to skin a cat.
But
you
it
know?
rarely happened. I mean, I've done many books with many other people. You rewrite it, you say, I didn't
I know
write
sometimes
this.
you didn't always agree, and Jacques said, oh, salo.
Someone,
But thank you.
This is
Anyway.
what makes it creative and fun.
I'm an editor by trade, and somebody just commented to me today that a writer friend of his said, the job of an editor is to make a great piece good. That is an absolute writer's view of editors. Alex, you were going to say.
I was going to say, just to pick up on what you guys were saying, but one of the strengths that Julia had was that she saw herself, she loved being a celebrity. She loved hamming it up on stage. But as Judith said, she was a private person. And when I was talking with her about her process, she says, well, I really see myself as a teacher more than as a celebrity. I just love to teach. And she said, and I'm also an eternal pupil. She really considered herself a student right up until, I can tell you, because I was with her 2 days before her death, and she was talking about how she wanted to go to a Chicago slaughterhouse and how she wanted to teach my kids how to cook and how she wanted to go fishing with the lobstermen in Maine at age almost 92. So this genuine curiosity that she had was a wonderful example to me. And it was a curiosity, and it was a generousness of spirit, underpinned by this work ethic and this attention to detail. And one of the fights that she used to get into with Simca and Loisette, her French collaborators, was that they would say, well, you do a pinch of this and a splash of that. And Julia would say, no, the American cook wants to know, what is a pinch? Is it a quarter teaspoon? Is it an eighth of a teaspoon? Is it, what exactly is it? And this was this sort of scientific, American, pragmatic approach that she brought to it. And I think you can extrapolate from that, and you can say, as Judith was just saying, that she wanted to have an entertaining experience, and she wanted to transmit real information. Editors today always say, what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway? And I don't like that phrase, but I do appreciate the sense that you want to not only be entertained, you want to be informed. And I think Julia was a great example of that. And the other thing that I, as a writer and as a human being, that I loved is this generosity of spirit, which allowed her to be very charming and go in and talk to the crusty old chef in Paris who would never spill any secrets from the kitchen to another Frenchman, but a tall, loud, funny American woman. She charmed these polecats, as Paul called them, right out of the tree, and she got them to tell them their recipes, and so she came away with the secrets to the beurre blanc that had been guarded by the family for generations, And so this sort of wonderful, funny, inquisitive impulse that allowed her to be somewhat of an investigative reporter. I just love that.
She was a reporter, I was about to say, and I think that's a lot of the pleasure she took in the series she would do with Jacques and with all these master chefs, it was called,
Right.
the young cooks. She was avid to learn from them. It wasn't like, oh, I have to put up with them on my show because we need some new blood because I've done enough series. It was, she was actively interested in choosing them and learning from them. She was excited by it.
She did appreciate, however, more than anything, she loved life, always going out. I remember when we did a thing at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington quite a number of years ago. She said, we'll meet at the bar for Martinet before we went there. Then we had a bottle of wine doing the thing. Then we went to Jean-Louis Paladin till like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So she really loved life, and she really appreciated life also. I mean, many, many times, I'm sure she has told you too, she said, aren't we lucky? I mean, aren't we lucky to be in the position that we are? We're having fun, we're making money out of it. I mean, so she did appreciate, life was, the binge for her, she said.
I think a lot of that ebullience comes through in the movie, too. A lot of that level. Jacques, did you ever speak French with her?
Actually, the first time that I met Julia, it was about 6 months after I was here, and it was 1960, and it was Helen Macaulay, was the food editor of House Beautiful and McCall, and she had sent Julia the manuscript of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and Helen, who kind of became my surrogate mother through Craig Claiborne, that. And she told me, you know, I have that thing, you want to look at it? I look at it, I said, gee, this is good. She said, well, the woman is coming next week to New York, and so let's cook for her. And so that's how I met Julia, which, of course, people didn't know her at the time because she hadn't published a book, she hadn't done any television show. And I spoke French with her that whole evening. We didn't speak English at all. She just came from Paris not that long ago, a couple of years, and my English was quite bad. Not that much better, but a little bit. And so we spoke French all the time at that point.
And was that the only time? Oh, so it was on many occasions when you first met
After
her.
that, we would throw a few words in French here or there, but no, mostly we spoke English after. But I remember at the beginning, we did spoke a whole evening only French. Yes.
One postscript I'll add, and then you have to prepare your questions and come to the mic because I'm about to open the floor to questions, is that did you know that the niece of Madame Brassard is now writing a book about Madame Brassard?
No kidding.
Yeah, that Madame Brassard was then the head of the Cordon Bleu and is not sympathetically portrayed in this movie, as those who have seen it will know. And her niece, by marriage, has decided this is a grave injustice, and she intends to write it.
She's going to rescue her reputation.
She's going to rescue her, rehabilitate her reputation. But she's embarked on research of her own, which I think will be very interesting because it's about the role of women in education in France after the war. Mm-hmm. So, and women as business people.
Yeah, I would also add that part in Paris, when she came to France, and after a year that was very close to my thinking and to what I experienced myself. Julia always said that we started apprenticeship together because she was in France in 1949 and I entered apprenticeship in 1949. I was a bit younger, but the spirit of it, the way the chef act, and the kitchen, the equipment, the stuff like that, I had in my mind, that's the way it was, you know. So it was very, very well done.
And how do you suppose a woman would have been regarded?
Well, strangely enough, not as bad as what people think in the United States, because I'll tell you one thing. I was in apprenticeship in 1949, but my mother had a restaurant in Lyon, and my aunt had a restaurant in Valence. I had another aunt who had a restaurant in Nantua. I now have two nieces who have a restaurant next to Lyon, and a cousin, female again, who have a restaurant in Lyon. So out of 7 or 8 restaurants, I'm the first one in the family, a male getting into that business. It was always women. Mm. So, you know, we, in the United States, people think in terms of French chefs strictly as male, because the one, probably not for the better, have been a great deal publicized during the time of Nouvelle Cuisine in the 70s. Bocuse, Guérard, all of the great French chefs have come here. But, you know, remember, there is only 500-star restaurant. There is only 23-star restaurant in the Michelin, and there is 138,000 restaurants in France. And most of them, like my aunt, cousin, too, are still owned by women cooking with women.
Owned by, but were they allowed into that apprentice system that you were in as a young teenager?
Certainly in Lyon, where I come from, Lyon is known for the mother of Lyon, la Mère Boisier, with a 3-star. You know, the highest La Mère Fillou, Léa, to all of those who were women at Lyon were really, really high.
But as adolescents, were there any women allowed into those apprenticeships?
No, I never. When I was in apprenticeship myself, we had 5 apprentices. I never saw a woman. No.
That's what I assumed. So if they wanted to learn, it had to be in their own family's restaurants. Yes.
That's a good point. Yes, probably. Yes, to a certain extent, I would say so. Yes, right. Mm-hmm. Good point. I never thought of that one.
So I'm going to ask if there are any questions and ask you to direct your question to one of the panelists because we'd like to have time for a couple of questions, so they won't have time to answer them all. And you're going to have to gear your questions to somebody else if you're following somebody who's asked one of them, because we'd like them to go around. So would you come up to the mic? Is that mic working, Rebecca? All the mics are working. Oh, yes, there's mics on either side of the room as well.
I actually have two questions. Is that all right?
They have to be directed toward two different panelists.
Well, my first question is to the entire panel.
No, you're not allowed.
Well, we can answer it if we want.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
And you know, when I was reading the Julia book, at the end of the book, she mentions that Julia never really took her seriously and really thought of it as a mockery. And it was quite disappointing to her because she never was able to get any recognition from Julia. Off the pages, do any of you know if that was really true or if they ever really had a chance to collaborate in a way where Julia saw her as more sincere?
I'm going to ask Judith to field this because this came up a lot after the movie, and I think Judith knows exactly what she wants to say.
Yes, and I feel freer to say this now. No, what really happened was I was going to go out and visit Julie and see what she was doing. I didn't even know what a blog was, and talk about permissions and using the recipes and things like that. Really a business visit. In the movie, that turned into that I was invited for dinner, but I wasn't, and or I didn't understand that. But in the meantime, I called Julia, who was in California, and she said, well, we'd better look at that blog. So we looked at it, and we had a very brief conversation after that, and she said, just pay no attention, this woman is not serious about food. She couldn't write that way. It was filled with four-letter words that don't go very nicely with food. And she just dismissed it. And so I called and said, sorry, I don't think I really should come out because I don't think I can help you in any way. So that's what happened. No, they never met. But Julia didn't hate her. She just dismissed her because she did not seem to be serious.
Okay, and the second question is directed to Jacques. I think clearly you have more experience, and your experience is obviously grander and vast. But yet, when I watch you on TV with Julia, you seem to acquiesce whether you're making a roast chicken or a tarte tatin, as really kind of tying the tides of Julia's way. Is that more of just a polite gesture? Because I noticed it was an ongoing theme, and I just wondered if that just made for good TV or how the chemistry worked.
He's a gentleman.
No, I mean, like in anything else, there is some give and take. We argue about one thing or another. You have to realize one thing to start with, is that conventionally, when I do a television series, we do 26 shows, which is about 130 recipe. I usually have the recipe ready when we start doing the series, and we shoot up to 3-4 shows a day. It's about 6, 7, 8 days. That's it. It's over. And you do the 100. The back kitchen knows what to do and all that because the recipe are there. When we did the show with Julia, we had no recipe. So it's like when you cook with your spouse. Why did we put scallion in that dish? Because it just happened to be there in front of us. So I grab it and put it in there, whatever. So that was a different thing. In fact, when the book came out, when the movie was done in the can, as they said a year after, it took 2 years because, as I'm sure Judith can tell you, they had to look at those shows ad nauseam, to extrapolate the recipe and ask us, call us, and so forth to create the book, which was a totally different way of doing it, and one of the reasons that it took maybe more natural. Another point also is that I do television show. I've done probably 100 shows on time. It's 30 minutes, so you are on time, like then you have someone going with a sign 6 minutes, 5, 3, 4, whatever. And so when I did it with my daughter, Claudine, I said, it's hard to do it because I'm showing the kid how to roll pastry, and I have a sign coming 2 minutes, so I push her over, grab the dough, and, so it's always a pressure that when we did the show with Julia, she said, we will cook, and when it's finished, we'll tell you. I think the longest show were over 100 minutes or whatever, out of 30-minute show. So for us, it was great. We had a glass of wine, we cook, we continue, we argue, we discuss. When it was finished, it was over. So it was a fun show to do.
Thank you.
I have to say that watching Jacques and Julia together, these guys were a comedy team. They could have taken this show to Vegas and had a... And I think that there was a lot of give and take, right? I mean, there was a kind of a creative tension.
No, Julia wanted to do this.
Jacques was a real
She wanted to
gentleman,
do
but
that.
I think, he's a tough guy. But Julia was no shrinking violet either. And
Of course she was.
And
Well,
I
Judith
think
was
that what
there.
I love about those shows is you get that creative tension.
Sure.
You don't find in television now. It's not. You don't see it in a genuine way. You see it in a sort of stage-produced way.
This
It's very
is totally
glitzy.
natural.
This,
Right.
the fact that they had 100 minutes to sit around and drink and discuss. The other thing you need to know is that Jacques and Julia, I think for years, before this was put on television, used to travel the country doing live cooking demonstrations.
right
And so this
here.
was a well-developed
Act.
relationship or
We-
pattern or act.
We started here.
You started here at BU. yeah.
Cooking in concert.
I
at
think it was
BU.
thanks to
was
Rebecca
organized,
that-
organized
yeah.
by Rebecca.
Now, I
You
think
know,
there's
we
a
did
funny
those
story there about that wonderful dish, I forget the name of it, where you stuff a chicken.
On Demi Doy?
No. Although, so the
We did
two
a
of you, this is
galantine.
the story that I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you two were cooking in front of a large crowd.
Yeah, it was
A
at the
live
Thai
audience.
Auditorium. We had like 400-500 people, right?
Yeah. And you're
Yeah.
about to go on stage to do this, it's sort of a turducken, but it's a chicken that is stuffed, I believe, with turkey.
Oh, like a galantine, yes, right.
A
to do-
galantine,
Yeah,
okay.
right, we did.
And
with
so what
the-
did Julia say to you just before you went on stage? She said, "Today we're going to do it with turkey." And Jacques said, "What?" And suddenly, boom, they were on stage.
Yeah, right. No,
Now,
she
it's a totally different.
She would do things often like this. She said, Jacques is going. So, like one time we said, okay, we're going to do dough. We had actually the president there of Land O'Lakes, so said we're going to use butter. I mean, we use a lot of butter anyway. So, Jeff Drummond, the producer, said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to do a dough, do an apple tart, and then we'll do a pie, a chicken pot pie with it to show the versatility. And we're talking about it, and Julia said, well, and I want to do my own dough on the side. I said, great, fine. So when we start the show, I do that dough, I roll it, and after I say, well, now Julia is going to show you another dough, and she said, well, Jacques is going to show it to you. I said, I am? Okay. She said, I want to do it in the food processor. I said, okay. So I said, how much flour you want? Couple of cups. She said, okay. So I put this in there. I said, how much butter you want? She said, I want Crisco. I said, what do you mean you want Crisco? We don't have Crisco. She said, we have Crisco. She had a can underneath. So we put like, well, 3/4 butter, but some Crisco just to, and then we did the dough, but she very often did that. She said the last moment, Jacques is going to do that. I said, I am, okay, fine, so we do it. So in a sense, as I say, since we didn't have any recipe, and it really didn't matter that much, and we had time, so we cooked like we do very often with friends, without really, I cook with Jean-Claude, here, my friend, for over 50 years. So, we don't really have a menu. We have ingredients, we start arguing, cooking, and to a certain extent, that's what we did. So it was true, and it was fun. And Judith was there for the whole taping with your doggy, so.
Watching what happened off camera.
Yes.
I remember being at we don't have anyone from WGBH here. Last time we met, it was at WGBH at a televised celebration they did for her 80th birthday. And for some reason I got invited and I was next to her. And as the cake came around, it was this huge cake. And I really wanted some, and I started eating it, and she looked at me and said, it's just Crisco and sugar, right? And I said, yes, but Crisco and dough is perfectly good. Other questions? We have one there.
Hi. I was wondering, out of all of you have written memoirs on food and about either your own wonderful, amazing lives with all of these stories that you've shared with us. And I wanted to ask if you could touch on what decision processes, how do you choose as writers what to include in these memoirs and what not to include? And if that's a difficult process at, crafting the story of someone's life or your own life, if you could speak to that a little bit. As memoir writers.
Judith, I'll say it. How do you decide what to include and what to exclude when you're writing a memoir? What was your preparation process, and how do you sort of make sense of your own life and decide how to structure it? It's about memoir writing.
Well, I think it's a good idea to feel what you're trying to say. What is it about your life that might interest people? because everybody can write a memoir. We can all just go home tonight and write a memoir.
But you would never say takeaway. You would never use the word takeaway, yes.
Yeah. But to focus on it, I mean, to me, it was my life in food, because I lived through, it was in the publishing business for over 50 years, and watched this tremendous revolution, and learned from everybody that I worked with, so that that was my focus. And I think you need to have that kind of handle. Otherwise, you just, run on and on and on. And then the other thing that happened, and this is very valuable, is if you can find clues to your past. What I found was a stash of letters that my mother had that I wrote from Paris for the 3.5 years I was there. And I had to get acquainted with this girl all over again. That was me, this brash, manipulative, but that was a great experience too, sort of putting the pieces together of who you were. Does that help? I think every memoir should be different. There's no one formula anyway, but those are the things to think about.
And Jacques, you're like Judith, enormously disciplined. So how did you decide what to include?
Well, to start with, it is a memoir, mine, and my life in the kitchen. So, I don't talk about my sex life. It's not an autobiography or anything like this. I don't have to be totally chronological as well. So important, even in the world of food, which was certainly, as I started as a kid, 6 years old, it was during the war. So it was important, to situate the food situation and maybe why I am so miserly in the kitchen, And then after working in my mother's restaurant and my aunt and all that was part of who I am. I mean, my culinary identity in a sense, And then after working in Paris and jumping from a type of food which would be quite different in big restaurants of the capital, the Plaza Athénée, Maxime, Fouquet's, and so forth. Very structured, very rigid, very organized, and so forth. And eventually, the break from that, coming to America, which I came, I said I'll go there a couple of years, and the first day I was in New York, I loved it, and I celebrated 50 years in America. I came in 1959, so you can see. So it was certainly sequential in that way, and throughout those years, what happened more or less to me, some of it, I didn't really want to talk too much about it, certainly like I had a very bad accident and all that, but the editor I was working with said, no, you have at least to mention it too, because it makes sense in the context of what happened, what you did later. So yes, you do have to choose at some point what you want to discuss, what you're interested in, and what you think ring true. I mean, the way you feel and where you are, who you are.
Did you go back to, did you find a trove of letters, or did you go back to articles you'd written when you first came here, or was there source material?
No, I didn't. I wasn't lucky to find that, but certainly I talked a great deal to my two brothers who are now both deceased, but about when we were a kid, and my mother, I said, do you remember when we were there, when we had the chicken, we were plucking the chicken or doing whatever, and those type of memory. Then of course, as it came, when I was working for Howard Johnson too, I mean, I could talk to Pierre Freinet or whatever, but the point is that it was closer enough that I remember more or less what I wanted to talk about. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
The gentleman.
I don't have a formula, certainly. This is my first experience with prose, probably the last one ever, so it's not, I'm not a writer.
That's
I mean,
not
per
true,
se,
you
that,
are a writer.
In that sense, yeah.
This is directed for anyone that would like to answer it. I was wondering, was there a priority to Julia's cooking? Was it nutrition, or basically healthy food, or a nice display, or good taste, or was it a combination of all of the above?
Let's have Judith answer that. That's certainly.
Well, that reminds me of, Julia was asked this question at we did a conversation up in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, and it was going to be in this little hall library, and we had to move to the auditorium because everybody came from all over Vermont. And somebody asked her, really, what is it about French cooking that is so special? And I can remember Julia sitting there swinging her leg, and she said, well, you take some green beans, and you just top and tail them. Sometimes you leave the tail on. And you put them into a big pot of boiling water. And she said, don't listen to those nutritionists. If you need extra vitamins, take them in a pill. You put them in a big pot of boiling water. And you cook them till they just have become luscious green beans and not crunchily undercooked. And then you drain them. And then you put ice on them. And she got more and more excited. And that holds the color. And then you bathe them in butter, and you bathe them until they're and salt them lightly, and you taste. That is soigné cooking.
I think that's a marvelous place to end.
Thank you.
And to announce the movie, that kind of love of food and technique mixed together. And the completely drenching love of France, too, that really comes through in Alex's book, which you all have to read, and in fact, Judith's book. Your love of Paris as a young woman absolutely comes through, and of course, Jacques is France. So I thank you all, and I know that you're going to really enjoy this however many times you've seen it. So enjoy it here and again, and thank you all panelists.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.